Welcome to Unveiling Death. I am Rabbi Jeffrey Weil. Hollow Father's Days, A Son's Loss, with Rabbi Eric Fusfield. Eric Fusfield has served as Deputy Director of the B'nai B'rith International Center for Human Rights and Public Policy since 2007, and as Director of Legislative Affairs since 2003. Eric, an attorney and rabbi, has represented the agency before Congress, the executive branch, and foreign governments. He also serves on the Virginia Commission to Combat Anti-Semitism. Eric and I were students together at the Washington College of Law at American University in the early 1990s. Eric Fusfield, thank you for talking to me on Unveiling Death.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's good to be with you.
We're talking about your dad's death. He died when you were 9 years old.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, what do you remember about that time, really that day or evening? Like, what do you remember about that? How did you find out?
Yeah, it's one of these moments in life where you try not to think about it too much because it's painful. And yet you can't forget it. The memory of it doesn't fade that much. So it was late at night on a Saturday night. And by late, I mean, I don't know, maybe around midnight. I was woken up by the sound of men in the house, whose voices I didn't recognize. And they seemed to be carrying my father out on a stretcher. My father had a heart attack in the bedroom. He had been sick all week and he was upstairs alone and had a heart attack. And then she discovered him late at night. And so that's when I found out. I found out immediately when it happened.
I mean, when you say you found out immediately, you found out that he was dead at that moment? I mean, as he was being removed from his room and taken out of the house?
At that age, you can't fully comprehend what's going on around you. But I remember my mother saying, "He's gone, isn't he?"
Wow.
And I knew what that meant because he was immobilized, he was unconscious, but really he had already passed away. And I think she knew this and she was crying. She said, "He's gone, isn't he?" And I knew what that meant, but I refused to believe what that meant because when you're that age, you can tell yourself anything or you can want to believe whatever you want to believe. So I remember lying there telling myself, whatever preposterous story a 9-year-old can tell himself to, soothe his nerves. And so I said, okay, it's just a doctor's appointment. He's just going for a checkup. Like the ambulance takes you for a checkup at midnight on a Saturday night. Obviously, that was it would be silly to imagine that, but I was just trying to tell myself something, and that to give me peace. And I thought he'll come back. He'll come back. And of course, he didn't come back. So my mother came back a few hours later alone. And then she tried to wake me and my older sister, who was in the next bedroom, tried to wake us up and tell us. And my sister, I guess she woke my sister up first, and they cried a little bit together. I was awake. I was awake the whole time. I pretended like I was asleep because I just I couldn't cope with the reality that had, fallen upon us. I didn't want to acknowledge that I was awake and I didn't want to deal with it. So I just lied there pretending like I was asleep.
You mean for those few hours between the time they took your dad from the home and the time that your mom came back, you were awake those hours as well, you think?
I was awake all of those hours. I didn't fall back to sleep. And it's strange to think an older version of me would have gotten up and said, "What the heck is going on?" And, gone into my sister's room and asked her what was happening if we were the only ones there. But no, I stayed in bed and I just lied there and thought to myself, tried to calm myself by saying, "This will be okay. This will be okay. He'll be back,"
Right.
even though I knew he wouldn't. And then when my mother came back and she tried to come in, she went into my sister's room first, and I could hear what she was telling my sister. She said he had a weak heart and he didn't make it. And they both cried about that. And then when she came into my room, I shut my eyes.
Hmm.
So and just, pretended I was asleep the way the kids sometimes when they want to get away with something. Eventually, I got tired of lying there by myself, and I got up and I went into the master bedroom to be with my mother and my sister. And my mother said, "Did you hear what happened?" And I just nodded my head.
Hmm.
And then, and then we just stayed together in the bedroom while we tried to figure out what to do.
Hmm.
And my sister later held my reaction against me. She said, "Oh, you found out that dad died and you didn't even cry. You just sort of nodded your head."
Hmm.
And I thought, well, okay. I really resented the way that she said that. That was my way of coping.
Hmm.
But, you know, she felt I should have, and her way of coping was different. She felt I should have been more open and authentic in
Hmm.
the way that I reacted.
Right.
But that was all I could do.
So I have a question. So we've been friends since 1991.
Yes.
This is 2025.
Yes, it is.
And um, we talked. I mean, I knew that your dad had died when you were a kid. I really thought that you were a little bit older. I thought you were like 13 or 14. Um, but even though we've known each other for a long time, have remained in contact with each other, I'm only learning about this experience since we started talking about this possible episode of Unveiling Death. And so I'm wondering if the same taciturn response that you had in the master bedroom with your mother and your sister when you were 9, is it this the same dynamic, or I guess reluctance to really delve into what you called obviously something painful? If that's the same reason why I have not heard much detail about this, or maybe it's me never really having, asked you.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I'm basically a private person by nature. I mean, there are some things that I'll share more readily with others, and some that I'm more guarded about. And even people I know well, I'm not inclined to say, "Let me tell you about the night my father died," because it is painful for me. But also, I'm just wary sometimes about sharing things that make other people uncomfortable. Like, well, now I'm putting this on their plate. Now they've got to deal with it. Sometimes that could be oversharing.
Mhm.
I mean, it's something I would share with my wife. Maybe, friends who ask me, but normally it's not the kind of thing I would open up about. There are other things about his passing that I would share more readily, and that is like it has more to do with the after effects, the growing up from that age on without a father and how that impacted me. I might touch on that, but I not wouldn't necessarily go back to the events of that night.
Right. So, we're this episode. This is early June now, and this episode will be released probably on Father's Day. I'm wondering how you remember Father's Days past. That Father's Day, the one that would be upcoming after your dad died. And just when you were a kid, when Father's Day would roll around and people would celebrate with their families, and you didn't have a dad.
Yeah, it was a very empty experience for me because we didn't have anything to celebrate. And I remember, you know, before he died, we would always, our way of celebrating occasions was to go out for Chinese food. And so we didn't do that or celebrate in any other way. Father's Day was basically we'd remember to place a call to my grandfather in New York, my father's father, who outlived his son by 15 years.
Hmm.
But we would call him, and say, Happy Father's Day, Grandpa. But that was it. Otherwise, there was no celebration. And yeah, it felt very hollow.
Hmm. Well,
Um,
empty and hollow are different than painful, I think.
yeah, it's not like I felt a sharp pain of longing or missing something. It was just there was a void, and I was aware of it. When you experience a loss like that, it can hurt you in the moment, but y- the you're more likely to feel greater pain and a different kind of pain as the years go by, because you relate to the loss differently as you grow older. So I may have felt the loss of a father more profoundly at an older age. And I mean, you talk about Father's Day, but I remember um, I was in Boy Scouts for a little bit, and they used to have these father son camping trips. And I remember going with my father one year, and then the next year he wasn't there. So I had to be grouped together with a couple of other fatherless sons, and we went together on our own, and one of the scout masters supervised us. But obviously I felt like an oddball. I felt misplaced because I didn't have a dad there. And I remember this was back in those days, somebody would when somebody asked questions about their family, they would say, well, what does your dad do? Like, they wouldn't be like, well, what does your mom do or your parents do? What does your dad do? And then I remember not really, feeling very uncomfortable fielding questions like that and discussing this topic. So I'd say, well, I don't have a dad.
Hmm.
And that was even more embarrassing. Like, what's the matter with you? You don't have a dad. Well, he died. I didn't really want to talk about
Right.
the death of my father, but there were moments when you really felt like you were missing something and you felt out of place
Right.
because of that.
Did you ever lie as a kid about not having a dad because you just didn't want to have that conversation? You didn't want to go there?
Well, lie about not having a dad. In other words, oh yeah, my dad is
Yeah,
at home. He's on a business trip right now.
something like that.
No,
Hmm.
because friends of mine from school or from our neighborhood, boy, they found out
Right.
because the school kind of broadcast it, and that made me even more uncomfortable because I was being singled out for something that I felt uncomfortable talking about. And but everyone knew, and then neighbors brought over food or tried to be nice to us in different ways. And then there was just there wasn't really any hiding it. People would come up to me and say, I'm really sorry for your loss, or your father was a wonderful man. The kind of things you say to somebody when they've lost somebody, but you say it to grown-ups.
Right.
As a 9-year-old boy, I didn't want to hear that.
Mm.
I don't want to hear that they love my father. I didn't want to hear that they're sorry for me because they don't really know what I'm going through. I just didn't want to hear it from them.
What did you want to hear, and did you ever hear that?
I don't know exactly what would have made me feel better, but I do know that sometimes talking around someone's obvious pain, or like it's subject avoidance.
Hmm.
Sometimes that could be helpful. And I mean, I don't mean to trivialize by saying, hey, great weather we're having. But, there is a place in our lives for talking about the weather, for talking about sports. There is a place for talking about something other than the topic that the person you're speaking to is trying not to think about 24/7.
Right.
So I don't know if there's one thing that somebody could have said to me that would have made me feel better in the moment, but I do know that there were things that people said to me that I didn't really want to hear.
Right. Got it. Got it. So you mentioned on these Boy Scout trips that they would connect you and some other fatherless boys with scout masters or whatever it was. Were there people at that time who sort of stepped forward to be surrogate male role models? I mean, you lost suddenly, and I want to say it was suddenly because your dad was not terminally ill, for a long time or anything like that. I mean, this was a sudden death, if I am remembering correctly. I mean, he was not feeling well, but didn't seem like there was a mortal kind of situation. Is that right? Just to clarify that?
Well, just to give you an idea, he died Thanksgiving week. It was Saturday night. It was the end of the week. On Monday, he went to work. And then Tuesday, he stayed home. He wasn't feeling well. And then Wednesday, he stayed home again. And then Thursday, we had Thanksgiving dinner, the three of us alone in the dining room while he was upstairs resting in the bedroom.
Hmm.
So his situation just got progressively worse. But Monday of that week, we had no inkling. And then Saturday night, he was dead.
Right. And
Yeah.
Thursday, when the three of you sat down for Thanksgiving dinner with your dad upstairs, you knew he was really not feeling well. It had been a few days, but you also had no inkling that he would die.
I wasn't ready to entertain the thought that whatever illness he had, he wouldn't survive. I thought, well, it's been a tough week for him, but he'll be back at work next Monday.
Right, but he also wasn't hospitalized.
He was not. That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Never went to the hospital until the ambulance came.
Right. So I was asking, before that,
Yeah.
with the sudden death, you lost the male role model, or at least the
Yes.
primary male role model, like he just vanished like that.
Yes.
And you're at a tender age, you're 9 years
Yes.
old, boy, and you don't have an older brother or any brothers. So
Right.
I'm wondering if there were any men who tried to successfully or not step forward to be a male role model for you, and was your mom sensitive to that?
Yes. In fact, well, I think my mother felt like she was in her own way trying to be a substitute father, and I think she believed that, but it's not the same thing. My mother deserves all the credit in the world for raising the two of us on her own after losing a husband at a young age, but it's there's no substitute for a father. Uh, in fact, my father had a couple of relatives. He had two brothers in New York, and he had a first cousin who he was close to in Pennsylvania. And one of my uncles and my dad's cousin, they would both invite me up to their homes for like a week at a time in the summer. A couple of times they did this. And, I would help out in my uncle's store in Riverdale in the Bronx. And my dad's cousin would take me sightseeing around central Pennsylvania. And I think this was their way of, maintaining a close connection with a nephew or a cousin that could be lost because the central connection there, my father, was gone, and so they didn't want to see us disappear. But also, they knew, you know, okay, now's the time for me to be, if not a surrogate father, maybe they thought it was kind of a surrogate relationship, but at least I'll be the close uncle or the close cousin.
Right. Right.
So I think that was their effort to step in there. I think my mother welcomed that.
Right. But did they, I mean, that's admirable. Did they invite your sister at those times too, or was this really for the son who lost his father?
It was the son who lost his father. Yeah, that's a good point. I never stopped to think, well, how come they're not inviting my sister? Maybe she was doing summer camp on a different schedule. I don't know. But yeah, I think it was clearly I'm the son without a father, and they figured they could step in and help.
Right. Are there times, I guess, throughout the year that you find yourself thinking about your dad more or more frequently? Your site, his birthday, Father's Day. And also, have there been times throughout the decades since your dad died that you, for whatever reasons, wherever whatever you were doing in your life, wherever your head was at that time, that you thought about him much less frequently?
That's interesting. It's not tied to a particular moment or time of year. I will tell you this. I'm fortunate in that because I live in roughly the same area where I grew up, my father's cemetery is very close by. And so I take moments to stop by there, even when, here's an example. Every year before Hanukkah, I make this pilgrimage to Krispy Kreme to buy jelly donuts for the holiday. And this was a Krispy Kreme that my dad used to take us to on the way back from Hebrew school on Sunday afternoons. And so I'm kind of paying tribute to him when I go to that same shop to get donuts, soup gagnon for my kids. But his cemetery is on the way.
Mhm.
So I stop, and if my kids are with me, we get out and we visit him for a moment, and then we keep going to the donut shop. So, but also every Tisha B'av, every
Tisha B'Av is the ninth of Av, which is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, commemorating historic Jewish calamities.
and it's customary to visit cemeteries on Tisha B'av. So I do that on his yard site. I will go. And during the high holidays, when
Right.
there's a memorial service, I'll go. So it's at least 3 times a year that we'll make a point of going to the cemetery. So those are times when I think of him. But you know, because I have 2 children of my own, and I name my son after my father, there are moments in my children's lives that make me think of my father.
Mhm.
My son had his bar mitzvah last year, and my dad was not around for my own bar mitzvah. And that was there was an awkward situation there where there was the synagogue where I grew up. There's a ceremony where the parent, usually the father, passes the Torah along to the child on a Friday night. And my mother felt like, well, maybe the grandfather could do that and then the rabbi said to her, "No, you're the one raising the child. You do it." And so, but again, it was like, the fact that my father wasn't there, we had to work something else out. And but I was there for my son's bar mitzvah, and I was very conscious of the fact that I was experiencing something that my father didn't get to experience. I taught my son how to shave. And I remember that's a rite of passage my dad was not around for. So yeah, I'm reminded of him all the time when certain moments not just the milestones, but the small moments happen with my own children.
Right. And that's how your father's death has influenced your own actions, posture, attitude as a father. And I wonder if his death, in a tragic way, has made you a more, I don't know what the right word is, like more mindful, appreciative, attentive father. What do you think about that?
Well, that's interesting too, because I've always tried to be a very hands-on father. And it's harder now that they're both in middle school. And my son is 14, starting high school this fall. They want less to do with me now,
Right.
but both their parents. And so I've got to pull back a little bit, which I'm still getting used to. But I've always tried to be hands-on, and I'm also aware of this, and it amuses me. My dad was an older guy. I mean, for our generation, the fact that he didn't have kids till he was in his 40s. By the way, I did the same thing, but for my generation, maybe that's a more normal thing. For him, I was always the one who had the old dad, and he was he was from he was from the World War II generation. He had a very different approach to certain things. His generation, they came before the baby boomers, and they didn't react that quickly to changes in the culture. I'm not talking about important social issues because my father, had basically a progressive outlook, but there were um, he didn't they had a way of interacting with the younger generation that was more formal,
Hmm.
and he seemed kind of austere at times.
Hmm.
Like it was hard to just sort of joke around with him, and or I had to be more careful about it. My son, he and I trash talk each other like basketball players.
Hmm.
We're always poking fun, and I know it's just so different than I would have been. I try to imagine what I would have been like with my father at an older age, and it's hard to imagine, but I know that it would have been different than I am with my son, and that's okay. I embrace that, because times have changed, and I don't mind. I like the relationship that I have with my son, and but it's different than the one I would have had with my father if he had lived.
Eric Fusfield, Rabbi, thank you so much for talking to me.
I'm happy to be here for this interesting, a little bit painful, but meaningful discussion.
Appreciate it. Many thanks to my friend, Rabbi Eric Fusfield. And thank you, creative director, editor, son, Sandy Weil. Share this episode and follow Unveiling Death. I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to me at rabbiw14@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening to Unveiling Death, Eternity in about 24 minutes, every other Monday.